If at some point, God forbid, that they decided that ultimately human beings are human beings from the moment of fertilisation, they could get rid of this law. But my feeling is that that isn't going to happen.
How about that then? God forbid that every human life is valued in Scotland. God forbid. I mean, that lady is the smiling face of evil in this video, but we'll hear more from her later. So this is another video looking at what's been going on in the buffer zone around abortion clinic committee stage in the Scottish Parliament. And there's plenty more material to show you here. We've got hysteria, we've got dishonesty, and we've got a lot of comments that really give the game away. The people who campaign for abortion actually feel guilty about it. Just wait and see what's coming up. I made a video a couple of days ago about the incompetence of a substantial number of the MSPs. When they're scrutinising legislation, they don't really understand what's going on. And yeah, they're just incompetent. And I said in that video I'd been pushed over the edge to actually point out these incidents. Now, what pushed me over the edge? Well, the main thing is that these MSPs are discussing a law that would intend to, for example, put me in prison for doing something that I do. And even more particularly my wife, who organises the pro-life vigil in Edinburgh, they'd want her to be put in prison. So that's a pretty serious matter. So that doesn't put me in a particularly sort of understanding and sympathetic mood towards them. Now, before I launch into this, I'll just mention again, I'm giving my public lecture about Humza Yousaf, Man, Myth and Muslim in Glasgow on the 20th of March. I have got an awful lot to say, which will be extremely interesting and very controversial in places as well. Some people have asked, am I going to just publish that on YouTube the next day? So well, the answer is no. We're probably going to take the talk around different parts of Scotland. But do get your ticket for that. There's a link below. It would be great to see you there. So this evidence session in the Parliament is mainly campaigners, for example, from the Back Off campaign, who've campaigned for buffer zones for a few years. So here we go.
It was a different experience. It was a different experience to seeing them on the street, which I think can be quite anger-inducing, to then actually facing them when you're, going to seek medical care.
Right, the young lady here admits that she was already angry about the vigils before she saw them when she was actually going for an abortion herself. Now that rather undermines her credibility, doesn't it? If you're already angry with something and you then claim, oh, it really did you a lot of harm, it was very upsetting, the question must be raised, are you saying that because it's the best way to attack something that you already are angry with? That suspicion should be present. And that applies to all these stories. In the Scottish Parliament, they generally take lived experience, as long as it comes from the right side. They take it without question. But when a campaigner puts forward personal experience that supports their campaign, the question should be asked, are they exaggerating? Is this really true? Are they saying this because they know it's what's going to advance their campaign, advance their cause most effectively? That question should be asked. In the Scottish Parliament, it tends not to be asked of people who are on the right side of the debate in their point of view.
I know for a fact that if the protesters were not there, that experience would have been, the equivalent of getting a tooth out for me. It was very not a big deal, but the protesters made it a very politicised and stressful experience.
It would have been just like having a tooth out, so there were no guilt at all. Now, if that's true, let's just think of a little thought experiment. Let's say that young lady was going to the dentist to have a tooth out, and there were a handful of people on the other side of the road with placards saying, I don't know, every tooth was created by God, you shouldn't kill your own teeth or whatever. Now, they had these sort of placards. Would that have resulted in her being traumatised and being emotionally disturbed about having that tooth out for decades to come? Would that have happened? No, it wouldn't have happened. And the reason that wouldn't have happened is because she actually knows that there's nothing wrong with getting a tooth out. But the reason it has such a powerful effect when it comes to abortion is that she knows in her heart of hearts that the pro-life activists are right. And that's why it's so stressful to see their message.
Thank you, Alice. Lily.
Now that's just the response from the chair of the committee. I've just included that because it shows the ethos of these committees. It's all empathy. Everyone's been really nice. And I think the tone created is often not conducive to scrutinising legislation and intelligent debate and logical analysis. It's like a therapy session rather than a committee session in a parliament. There needs to be some challenge and sharpness there. And I think the ethos they create mitigates against that.
and it was completely unavoidable. And this group of people was you simply couldn't avoid it, and it was very intimidating. And they were holding up placards, and I'd always kind of been pro-choice, but I had no concept of the fact that protests happened in the UK. I kind of thought it was a very American occurrence. So,
right, some people on the other side of the road with placards, praying silently. Does that amount to intimidation? Only if you redefine intimidation, or if you stretch the definition of intimidation beyond all recognition. But that's what campaigners do these days, and it's just standard fare in the Scottish Parliament and wider society as well. So to call that intimidation is nothing remotely like the normal understanding of intimidation until very, very, very recently. And they're always very keen to try and link the vigils to the United States of America. Implication being everything Christian from America is bad. So we can link it to America, must be especially bad. It's a sort of xenophobic, racist type view that people hold. I mean, there is a lot in American Christianity that's very dubious. There's also a lot in it that's absolutely fantastic as well. The Western media, UK media, only report the worst bits. So it does create this negative impression of American Christianity.
And beyond that, when I was in there, my partner at the time had gone outside for some fresh air and was approached by one of these people. So when they're saying that they're standing there, they're not doing anything invasive, it's very far from the truth, as the other accounts will also have you know.
Right, the vigils in Scotland, there's one in Glasgow, one in Edinburgh. They're both under the auspices of the 40 Days for Life organisation, and they very strictly do not approach anybody. But this is a one-off story, and the conclusion is they are approaching people. Right, just as a matter of logic, that should have been challenged by someone in the committee. They should say, well, who are they? The fact that you're claiming this happened once can't be used to come to the conclusion that this is what they are doing. In other words, when they say they're not doing it, they're really lying, because they are whoever they are supposed to be. Now, let's say even if this was happening, even if people were approaching people, stopping them to speak to them in the street, I'm not sure that would be a bad thing. If someone does that and you say no thanks, then I think that should be fine. But anyway, so even if this was happening, you could have a law to stop that specifically. You don't need to ban the whole lot.
And they went up and they handed him leaflets containing misinformation about healthcare.
So this leaflet, where is it? This is supposed to be an evidence session. And no MSP said, okay, you're talking about this leaflet. Has anyone got it? Can we see it?
These protests aren't neutral. They aren't peaceful. There's something very dangerous and malicious about handing out information in that manner.
But it's a bit of a ridiculous comment, isn't it? Saying the pro-life vigils are not neutral. Well, of course they're not neutral. They're pro-life. What's the problem with that? Now, saying that they're not peaceful, again, it's redefining words. If a handful of people standing praying silently isn't peaceful, then what is? But they can just redefine words to their heart's content, and it doesn't get challenged in the Scottish Parliament. When you use the words malicious and dangerous, that's just hysterical. And it's hate-mongering. It's stirring up hatred against the vigil participants. And this hatred that's been stirred up by the political establishment and by the media has resulted in crimes being committed against people at the vigil. I'm going to make a video about that next with my wife. She'll tell some of the stories of things that have happened.
They would say that they're not aggressive acts, or it's not an act of violence to occupy space like that. But when you are gathering and you're distributing misinformation like that, it's frankly really scary.
But again, aggressive, violent, ludicrous, laughable, hyperbole, absolute nonsense. This just reminds me of watching the committee about the conversion therapy ban, where all the witnesses were saying, oh, it's a form of torture. And the MSPs, oh, thanks, yes, well, I didn't realise it was torture. Thanks for telling me. I can see there is torture now. I mean, comments like that, to say that a handful of people standing praying is aggressive and violent, I mean, that first of all needs laughing at. And after then, it needs to be just refuting in the strongest but clearest possible terms. Any MSP do that? To any MSP just push back at that a little bit? Can you explain what you mean by violent? In what way is a handful of people standing praying aggressive and violent? Can you just tell me a bit more about why you use those words? No, not a bit of it.
Anti-choice individuals claim that they're offering advice. It's very much hinged on this idea of kind of saviourship, and they're framing themselves as these, providers of care. They can help you come back from, making bad decision. And in reality, as Rachel said, it's incredibly dangerous what they're doing. And if anything, I think it's very misguided and it's very naive and rather disrespectful to a healthcare system which is regulated and which is set out to protect people's safety and provide accessible healthcare.
See themselves as saviours, yes, absolutely. Because these vigils do save babies from death. They do that. There are stories where people are going to have an abortion and they change their mind because they see people in the vigil or they see the placards or they go and talk to the people, and that is a wonderful thing. You know, what's the problem? I mean, that's the ultimate question here, isn't it? Are we about saving babies or killing babies? Now, in the Parliament here, we've got someone who's mocking those who want to save the unborn child and honouring those who want to kill the unborn child. And at the end there, we get the thing, you know, the NHS is regulated, it's professional, abortion is official. You know, it's legal, it's NHS policy, as though that's the last word. Well, it's not. The moral law is higher than the output of the Scottish Parliament and the policies of the National Health Service. That may be a newsflash to some people in the committee, but that's certainly not a newsflash for me, and I'm sure it's not for you either.
Hi, I'm Rachel Clark. I am from BPAS. For those of you that aren't aware, we are the largest abortion provider in the UK. We're a charitable abortion provider.
Or a charitable abortion provider. That's the most lovely and kind type of killers of unborn children. And this lady has this smile fixed to her face as much as possible as she says some pretty appalling things.
It's also resulted in some of our staff expressing fear when they're walking to their cars at night, when they're having to walk past them. I've got reports of them being chased down the street in the dark. We have recently had one where someone was followed to her car and then the next day it was keyed. There's no proof of who that was, but I think it's quite suspicious, if I'm going to put it like that, that's been what's happening in that area.
Right, that story, I don't believe it. I know a lot of people in the pro-life movement. I know quite a few people involved in it in England as well. And the suggestion that some of them might be vandals like that is just ridiculous. There is no lunatic fringe of the pro-life movement in the UK. It just doesn't exist. These are generally speaking, these are very committed Christian people who would not dream in a million years of doing anything like vandalising someone's car. Now, she presents no proof. This story wasn't in Scotland. It's been presented by someone with a huge vested interest to exaggerate or even make up stories to demonise pro-life activists. It's got no credibility at all. But in the Scottish Parliament, again, completely unchallenged by the MSPs.
But when you really begin to dig down with them, actually the impact on them is really severe, and it really does affect how they feel about their ability to do their job.
So the abortion practitioners, why does the presence of a vigil affect them so powerfully? Well, I think the answer is very straightforward, because they already feel guilty about what they do. They suppress that guilt, and when someone pricks their conscience and brings that guilt to the surface, they get angry.
Coming to work every day at the Queen Elizabeth actually meant that she would have to pass the protesters in the morning and then again at night, and sometimes she'd go home and cry. And I just thought that was an extremely powerful account of...
Again, another story the same. Her conscience has been pricked, so she feels guilty, and that has a strong emotional effect on her.
Refugees really at extremely vulnerable points in their lives.
I mean, refugees, what's that got to do with it? It's a non-point. But in the Scottish Parliament, if you can mention refugees, that's probably going to score you a point.
Absolutely. So for us, I think there's one key leaflet that seems to make its way around pretty much the whole country.
This leaflet's around the whole country. I've never seen it. I mean, this is supposed to be an evidence session. How about presenting this leaflet? Have we got a copy of it? Any evidence that's ever been used in Scotland? But none of the MSPs ask anything like that.
It includes line drawings of fetuses growing. It also includes a poem that starts, "Dear Mum, please don't do anything to harm your baby today."
Well, this leaflet sounds good to me so far, but she's taken it for granted that people will be shocked and horrified by those lines.
There's a list on that leaflet which includes a large number of inaccurate medical information. That would start with the fact that the erroneous fact that abortion causes breast cancer.
Okay, yeah, people should be careful not to say things that they haven't got good evidence for. Now, in the field of medicine and psychology, there are things that are controversial, where some studies might find something, some other studies might not find it, and professional opinion might be divided, so these things are not always cut and dried. There have been cases where pro-life activists have said things and written things that are not justified by evidence, and I think they would need to be really careful not to do that. But this idea that abortion causes breast cancer, it's a bit of a grey area, because this is the fact of the matter. The fact of the matter is, if a woman becomes pregnant and goes through to have the baby, that reduces her risk of breast cancer. Okay, if a woman becomes pregnant but has an abortion, that takes away this reduction in the risk of breast cancer. So if a woman is pregnant and she has an abortion, from that point in her life, having the abortion will result in a higher risk of breast cancer from then on. Right, but I wouldn't say having an abortion increases the risk of breast cancer. I think that's the wrong way to articulate that. I think that maybe, as I explained it, it's the fact that having an abortion takes away what would have been a benefit in reducing the risk of breast cancer. But that's quite a subtle point, I would say. But again, if they want to make a law about medical misinformation, make one. They don't need to ban the whole thing.
Thank you for clarifying that. Thank you.
The MSP at this point has about several questions, but instead he just accepts what's being presented. They're referring to a leaflet that hasn't been shown to anyone. There's no evidence that's been used in Scotland, but he just says, thanks for clarifying.
It's all to do with them wanting to ban abortion outright. And I think actually when we see how blatant and transparent this is, messaging on the website of one of these protest groups, they say that they want to, end the scourge of abortion. These people aren't, quiet, kind, people that are just trying to go about their days and help people. They are backed by some very... I'd say dangerous people that are really trying to come for our reproductive rights, and in particular our right to abortion.
So the pro-life activists, they're not quiet or kind people. They're not kind people. It's a pretty slanderous thing to say, isn't it? Totally upside down view of reality. And I think with that, we need to hit back with the truth, because they can't handle the truth. The truth challenges them. It pricks their conscience, which is why they want to ban it in as many contexts as possible. Now, they're talking about organisations, normally the 40 Days for Life organisation, because in Scotland, there's basically a vigil in Edinburgh, one in Glasgow. They're both under the auspices of the 40 Days for Life organisation. Now, 40 Days for Life is based in America. It's got a UK operation down in England, but it actually has very little input to the vigils. If 40 Days for Life disappeared completely, it would make virtually no difference to the vigils, because it's just local people organising themselves and going along. I mean, there's no costs involved virtually. It's very straightforward indeed. Now, in another committee, there was a suggestion made that if people are fined for the vigils, well, fines won't work because the rich American organisations will just pay fines for them. No evidence for that at all. And I think that just would not be true. So they were taking the line that obviously we need prison sentences because the rich American donors will pay fines. But it's just total fiction. Right, let's hear from the representative of Police Scotland next.
How would a police officer determine what somebody was praying about silently?
Well, yeah, I mean, so I guess in terms of that and in providing evidence to the prosecutor in terms of what the person was doing, it would really just need to be a physical description of the person's demeanour, as opposed to going into the realms of perhaps what they were thinking.
Would Police Scotland have any concerns about enforcing legislation that was around what somebody was thinking?
Yes, yes. I'm certain that isn't an area that we would go to or encroach upon or ask about or try and describe at all. That's an area we would stay clear of.
Okay, that's quite an entertaining clip, but it's not really the point, because the law proposed is about influencing, and it would be about what's recognisable as an attempt to influence. So it wouldn't really be about what's going on in your head. In other words, if a group of people were to stand in a line outside an abortion clinic with their hands together praying about the weather, then they could be guilty because they look like a pro-life vigil. That's what the crime would amount to. It would be a crime of appearing to be engaged in some sort of pro-life activism.
If at some point, God forbid, that they decided that ultimately human beings are human beings from the moment of fertilisation, they could get rid of this law. But my feeling is that that isn't going to happen.
So back to our friend from BPAS, I had to say I do find that comment absolutely sickening. She uses the phrase, God forbid, and in the committee in the Scottish Parliament, there's no pro-life voice at all to push back or challenge that or to ask her anything about that. But let's prove her wrong, shall we? Let's prove her wrong. And it's pretty obvious that in order to do that, we're going to get no help from the Scottish Government or any party currently in the Scottish Parliament. Every human life is of immense value and we need to protect it. One way you can do that is by voting for a pro-life party. If you vote for Labour, the Conservatives, the Lib Dems, the Greens, the SNP, Alba, Reform, you're voting for abortion. They're all pro-abortion parties, and then putting your cross next to them, then you're saying that you're happy for the killing of the unborn to continue. If you vote for the Scottish Family Party, your vote is delivering the message that no, you're not happy for this to continue, and this is a deal breaker for you. You're not going to vote for a party that's going to kill the unborn. So as well as voting for us, do join the Scottish Family Party as well. There's a link below. Get your tickets for my talk about Humza on the 20th of March. And thanks for watching.